These days, we have an abundant supply of literature on the subject of happiness. We have articles, books, and podcasts that teach us how to be happy in our lives and also raise our happiness levels. But my guest today took a different approach. Back in 2014, he delivered a TED talk titled How to Be Unhappy. In that humorous but insightful talk, he suggested three steps that people can follow to be unhappy. But did he really want to teach people how to be unhappy? Today, I'm going to ask him that as I'm joined by Dr. Matthew Whoolery, a psychology professor at Brigham Young University in the US. He also worked as an associate professor of psychology at the American University in Cairo. He also got the opportunity to work as an anthropologist in Namibia with the Himba tribe. Dr. Matthew, welcome to the program and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, so I want to start with your professional life first. What made you interested in being an academic in the field of psychology? Was it like a childhood fascination or something like that?
No, it really wasn't actually. It wasn't until I was at university I actually changed directions. I was originally in physics, was interested in theoretical physics and these kinds of things, the big sort of stuff. And I have this, I don't like not knowing about things. And so I had been, my whole life had heard about Sigmund Freud. And so I thought, well, I should read Freud, so at least I know what he said. He seemed like an important person. So I went to the library and I found 18 volumes and I just decided to start at one. So I read a lot of Freud. And it was really fascinating. It kind of opened up the psychological world for me. And then after that, I read a lot of Carl Jung, and he sort of sealed the deal for me on psychology being a field of study worth spending a lot of time in. A lot of people's complaints is that psychology doesn't seem to have a lot of great answers to the questions that they ask, but I would say always that psychology has the best questions, even when it doesn't have very good answers. So
Yeah, I understand. So at least psychology can ask some questions and maybe we'll try to find the answers. So the first step is to ask the questions. If we are not asking,
that's right.
How can we find the answers?
That's right.
So now let's talk about your TED Talk. I mean, it's so interesting, at least the title, How to Be Unhappy. It's so fascinating. And if you write How to Be Unhappy on YouTube, your talk is the first such search result.
That's right. Not many people are asking for that.
Yeah, exactly. So you took a different path, as I said in the introduction. So why did you choose to deliver a TED Talk on how to be unhappy? And when you proposed the title to the TED Talk authorities, well, I don't know if they approached you or you approached them. So were they surprised when you said you were gonna deliver a talk on how to be unhappy?
Yeah, for sure. They had invited me to give a TED Talk, but hadn't really dealt with the subject matter yet. And so then I suggested that this is what I would talk about. If they were like, what? Why would anyone want to listen to a talk on how to be unhappy? And I said, well, I mean, there's satire in there on the kinds of things that we do that clearly lead us away from being happy, which seems to be the goal of most people. So it was meant to be, enjoyable and funny and that kind of thing. What was funny in the preparation for a talk like that, you prepare a lot. And so I had humorous things in there, but I forgot it was funny. So when the audience laughed the first time, I thought, oh, that's right, this is funny. So so it's meant to be in good fun, but to say something quite serious, right? Which is that we do a lot of things in our lives that really make us unhappy. While we might be saying to ourselves, I'm working at being a happier person, we're actually working against ourselves often.
Yeah, I understand. So you used a technique in your TED Talk by telling people how to be unhappy. You are actually teaching them how to be happy. So what is this technique called? So is it like irony or reverse psychology or something else?
Yeah, if it's a reverse psychology, it's a very open one in that my audience is sort of in on the joke. So you're right. I'm really actually trying to teach them how to live better, but doing it through a way that, yeah, I don't know if you've noticed this before. It's true for me too. Sometimes when people come out and just say, do this, do this, do this, we've heard it before. So to kind of flip that around a little bit, I tried to take an approach that was a little more novel and that people might be willing to listen.
Yeah, exactly. And
so I don't know if it was another talk on how to be happy. I just don't think as many more people have been interested in it. I think it because it says how to be unhappy.
Yeah, exactly. And if you check the internet actually has an abundant supply of talks and books and podcasts like how to be happy. If you are taking a different approach, so you easily attract the attention of the audience.
That's right.
So this technique, is it effective in academic teaching? Do you also use it in the classroom at the university?
Certainly humor I use a lot. Humor allows your audience to be open and take things in a way that sometimes seriousness doesn't. So certainly in the way that I teach at the university, there's good humor involved in things. I mean, there are times where as a class, we're laughing really hard about something. And sometimes it's something, fairly serious subject matter, but we just find it to be humorous. And I think often humor allows us a way in to people's minds and hearts.
Yeah, I think that's one of the easiest way to get into people's minds and hearts. And also, I was browsing the website. I think you are very familiar with it, ratemyprofessor.com. I think it's very popular.
Oh.
And I
don't look at that, but yes.
Okay. I was checking the feedback that your students have given, and it was like Dr. Matthew is a really funny person. He is hilarious. You should take his class, and he takes a subject and tries to simplify it, and he always tries to add the elements of humor and fun to explain his ideas and the lesson. So from those feedback, I got an understanding of how you teach at the university.
Yeah. So well, teaching is always part performance, right? There's the subject matter, and then there's sort of the song and dance of actually teaching. And there's some people who do no song and dance and no humor. And even as a great teacher, even as with a lot of knowledge, it tends to not come off very well. And so if you're having an enjoyable time together, I think that's important.
Yeah, I understand. And now this question comes to my mind. Have you naturally been, like, since your childhood, have you naturally been a funny person, like, who wants to make fun, or who wants to take things or deliver things this way?
It's interesting. I'm thinking of Carl Jung as I'm saying this. Carl Jung, by the way, had just a wonderful sense of humor. He's a really funny person. As a therapist, I think that was an important tool too. But I think, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about even just in my own home and with my own family, just joking around and finding things funny, being witty is an important value, Being a professor is interesting because it's part performance, it's partly what persona you take on yourself when you're doing it, right? I imagine that who you are in one situation isn't the same as you are, in a situation you're doing an interview with somebody. And so, part of it is persona. It's still you, it's still me to be that, but that's something I put on a little bit in that part of my life. In my normal everyday life, if I go to a party, I tend to go sit off by myself or like play with the pet dog or something. But as a professor, it forces me out of that and forces me to be more open. And so it's good. I like that. I like that part of me. But it's a part. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. So now let's talk about your TED Talk. You suggested 3 steps, and your first suggestion to be unhappy was to live in the past or the future. Now, I get about the past thing. So the past, it's past, it's already gone. So there's no way we can change it unless we travel back to the past and travel back in time using a
Mhm.
time machine. So there's no
Right.
way, there's no way we can change the past. So it's better to accept it and move on. So I get that part. But
Mhm.
my question is about the future. So I want to
Mhm.
quote you. You said, we have been taught that joy will come when we graduate, get a better job, get married, have children, make more money, or fall in love. And the reason this creates misery is that happiness can only happen in the present. So my question is this. I think there is a fine line
Mhm.
between what you were saying. Like, are you advising people not to be ambitious or set goals for the future when you tell them not to focus on the future? Is it something like that?
That's a good question. I mean, the area that I occupy in psychology would probably be called cultural psychology, right? So it's looking at how different cultures understand the self, understand even things like what it means to have a good life, right? One of the things you find in Western society is a really intense future focus. And it certainly creates ambition. It can create a lot of greed as well, but um, it creates people who are future oriented and focused and thinking a lot about what they want to do. Um, One of my favorite sort of corrections on that comes from Tolstoy. He has a short story, and it's a short story, but too long of a story for me to tell you the whole story right now. But anyway, he basically says at the end that one of the questions in the story is called three questions. One of the questions is, when is the most important time? And he says the most important time is now, for it's the only time you have any power. Um, because of course the future, you just don't know whether that future can come to pass at all. I mean, it could be that you or I will die today. And so all of that effort and time and stress and work and maybe misery I'm causing myself now so that I have some future good. I may die tomorrow, and none of that ever happens. And so all of the stress and the strain I'm putting on myself and on my relationships is meaningless. So it's not that I think certainly a person who has PhD shouldn't ever say, don't aim for things. That isn't what I mean. But while you're aiming in some direction, still the joy you have is today and in the work you're doing. And so if you're doing something and you're feeling miserable, and it takes a month, I don't know, maybe there's a good enough bet you'll be around in a month that you're going to put yourself through some present misery to achieve something better. But if the work that you're doing um, is misery inducing for you and for your people close to you that you love, it's probably something you should reconsider. How many people do you know? I know so many people who, in their late teens and early 20s, were convinced, I'm going to become a millionaire by the age of 30 or something like that. And they're my age, they're well past 30, and they're still not millionaires. And, so what was it worth?
Yeah, I
So what
understand.
I have found in many of the other cultures I've lived in is they're much more present oriented. When you sit down with them, you're just there with them rather than you're distracted out towards something you need to accomplish or something you need to do or toward your next appointment. And I found that in cultures like that, there's a more stable sense of interpersonal joy um, than in ones where it's all about some future moment that you're aiming for.
Yeah, I understand. So I guess if you are focusing on the future, just don't set a goal that will make you work really hard or really intensely, so you forget the present moment. So or something like
Yeah,
that.
and there's work that you can do that might be intense, but you love the work, or it's important to you, it's meaningful to you. Then I think you can get involved in something that maybe is going to take a long time, or it may take a lot of work. So, for example, when you're getting a doctorate, there's a lot of sort of grueling moments in there, right? And there were a few times I just had to really rethink it, and I remembered saying to myself, "Well, what if this is it? What if I'm only going to live for one more month? Would I do this for that month?" And there were times where I said no, and the question was, okay, should I drop out of grad school? There were other times where I was like, I do love what I'm doing, and I had to remind myself almost of that the joy wasn't finishing, but the joy was a choice I've made to be involved in this. It's easy to forget that, right? When you've made a choice that's a long-term effort, it's easy to forget that you chose it at some point because you enjoy it. So it was finding joy not in the end product, but where I was in that moment. And often that joy, I think, comes in our relationships too, right? That maybe if I'm working on some project for years and I feel so miserable, it's probably because I'm neglecting the people that are most important. So I have to make sure I, in the present moment, care for those relationships as well.
I understand. So, what do you think about self-help books? Do you think they help people improve their lives, or do they create unrealistic optimism?
Yeah, I think one of the problems that I've seen in my opportunities and living in quite a few different cultures. I was also closer to where you are. I've been to Bangladesh, actually, to Dhaka, but was in India, and one of the things that I would say makes Western cultures, particularly America, quite different. Maybe especially America, because even some Western cultures don't fit this very much, is a desire to be happy, an expectation to be happy, and even a sense of entitlement toward being happy. That I should be able to be happy no matter what kind of life I'm living. I should be able to be happy no matter what's happening in my life or in the world or anything like that. And I think those expectations of happiness paradoxically lead to a lot of unhappiness. Viktor Frankl put it this way. He said, Americans tend to not have a very good place for suffering, for the normal suffering that we all have in life. That's normal to struggle and to suffer. He said, so they're not only unhappy, but they're unhappy about being unhappy. And another place says they're ashamed of being unhappy. And I think that's really true for a lot of Americans, is that being unhappy is unavoidable. It's part of life. But because they've been taught that being happy is normal, they feel like somehow they're failing, or there's something wrong with them. You look at how many Americans self-identify as having mental illnesses, often relating to feeling unhappy in one way or another. And you see how much Americans expect that happiness is normal. And I mean, the happy times in life are wonderful, aren't they? I mean, the times where life is just kind of everything's landing just right and everything's going smoothly. I love those moments for sure. I love those way more than the suffering moments. But I think I'd be wrong to expect them or to think they'll stick around a long time.
Yeah, I understand. I think happiness and sadness comes in phases. So you cannot actually avoid the sad parts of your life. So if you're sad, maybe that will pass at some point. So then
it always does, and so does the happiness. It's the only thing you can know will happen. Is that the way you feel today won't be the way you feel in a month. That's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
So that you asked about the self-help things. I think that's the danger, is that then happiness becomes a performance, a goal for me to achieve. I don't think happiness comes that way. I don't think that setting a goal to be happy is usually very useful.
Yeah, I understand. So you also said in your TED talk that thinking only about one's own self will certainly create unhappiness. And I want to quote you again. You said the 1980s were a great time in America for this unhappiness creating tool. There was even a popular song that taught us that the greatest love of all is learning to love yourself. So do you think individualistic cultures like we see in the US and other Western nations, do you think these cultures are obstacles in some way to achieving happiness?
It's interesting. This summer I was in Scandinavia, and it was an interesting experience to see cultures that are still quite individualistic, yet lacking some of that I don't know exactly how to say it. I'm gonna have to reformulate my mind around this one, but lacking some of that unhappiness, stress that I feel like I see in my own culture. And I think that the reason there's a pretty strong social contract, right? The way that people are toward each other, the way they treat each other, the way society treats people, right? It's pretty difficult to find, long-lasting happiness in life when you're always about a week away from poverty, right? Which I think a lot of Americans find themselves, and even middle-class Americans are pretty close to a paycheck away. They don't have health care, and they don't have money, and they would lose their house and their car and everything, right? So I don't think individualism has to go that direction, but I think it can. It tends that direction. One of my daughters was in a class in high school, and the teacher passed around a little card and said, write down anonymously just the biggest worry in your life. And my daughter said over half of them wrote loneliness. I thought that was interesting, just because I live in a fairly sort of close community, and there's a lot of, people know their neighbors, that kind of thing. And yet the loneliness is just such a major thing. And I've lived in cultures where I think most people almost couldn't feel lonely. You just couldn't feel lonely if you wanted to.
Like the culture in India and Bangladesh,
Yeah,
we are very collectivist society. So there is no way you can feel lonely, because you are always talking to friends, talking to neighbors, and you are always interacting. The level of social interaction is really high in this part of the world. So loneliness
I found that I found that at being a professor in India. My students saw me as a full human being who had thoughts and needs and these kinds of things, and they responded to that, and I responded to theirs, and we were close to each other as people. America is much cooler, and then lacking also some of that infrastructure that makes people's lives feel safer. So I think the two of those things together the world feels more dangerous, more risky.
Yeah, I understand. So do you think the US culture should be a bit more collectivist than its present level of individualism? I mean, would it be better, let's say, for happiness, if Americans are a bit more collectivist in their nature of behavior?
Oh, for sure. Because I'm sure you've read about this study done at Yale, right, where they follow people from about university age, late teens, early 20s till death, right? And I think all the participants have died now. Only study ever done that way. Very difficult to do. But they studied all different aspects of these men's lives. It was only men, because back in that era, people didn't think that studying women was relevant. It's bizarre, but it's the way it was. And the number one thing that they said was predictive of better health, longevity, better mental health, so many things, was just close, loving relationships. That was the thing. And the thing that predicted all of the bad was alcoholism, which destroys relationships. And so I think there's pretty strong evidence that it's relationships all the way. So if you live in a society that says it's not about your relationships at all, it's only about how you feel about you, of course you're going to feel lonely and isolated. You've been taught to be lonely and isolated. And I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, I understand. And also, this is a big problem in the Scandinavian and the Nordic countries. They talk a lot about this problem, loneliness, because these cultures, they say it's like a very individualistic or like ultra individualistic society. So, but they are taught to focus only on themselves and forget about the rest of the world. I mean, in Finland, where I have lived in for 3 years, they don't even know who their neighbors are. They don't talk.
That's right.
It's so strange. And I think it's also the same in Sweden and also other Scandinavian countries. And you have recently visited Scandinavian countries. So I think you have also noticed it, like the level of social interaction is really low. And when you walk down the street in Sweden or in Finland, it seems like nobody is like worried about anyone else around them. Everybody is focusing only on themselves. So in those cultures, I have talked to Finns, and I have also interacted with them closely, and I try to understand. I also talk to the academics in Finland, and I have tried to understand this problem. And this is like a common conclusion. They say because we have been taught to extremely focus on ourselves only, this has led to a big problem of loneliness, and it has reached like an epidemic level. So it's a really big problem in those societies. And also, I think in other Western countries where individualism is stressed and emphasized, you are sure to end up with this loneliness problem. Whereas in our part of the world, in South Asian countries, if you think about it, we are very closely tied to our family members and relatives and friends and neighbors, so we don't when we talk about the concept of self, it's always we. It always
That's right.
involves other people.
Yeah.
But for people like you in that part of the world, it's me, it's me, it's me, it's I. It's never we.
That's right.
So I think and that's a big problem. And I love a lot of things about the Scandinavian culture, but I think this is a really big problem, because if you are always focusing on yourself, it will evidently lead to loneliness, and that's really a big problem. So from that sense, we can just safely conclude, without doing any study maybe, that if you are a bit more collectivist in your nature and in the society and community you are living in, so that actually might help you to become a bit more happy. Let's put it.
I think so. Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
And I think that we can even have in different parts of our lives, different parts of us, right? So I think you could, in your work hard, be ambitious, focus on what you're trying to accomplish. When work is over, it's relationships and closeness and loving relationships, the thing that seemed in this study to be the primary predictor of a good life. And so I think there's an ability we can have to appreciate and enjoy the values of what those different cultures offer. And we can be sort of culturally flexible. So in certain parts of my lives, I think, focusing on what I need to get done and getting that done and that kind of stuff is good. Like I've lived in places where getting things done can be immensely difficult. And in fact, I think sometimes that interfered with my own well-being. I'm thinking of when I lived in West Africa, there were times that I just needed to get like 3 things done that day. And I could just get 1 thing done because it was just, the inefficiency was weighed on you a lot. So I think you could have efficiency in certain parts of your life, but then be able to come back to that closeness and those close relationships. I try to find that balance in it.
Yeah, I understand. I totally agree with you. So you have worked in Africa, and you're also a Fulbright scholar and a visiting professor at Lady Shri Ram College in India. So I want to know what these multicultural experiences have primarily taught you. What was the main lesson that you took away from these cultures?
I think one of the things I focus on in the teaching that I do is on the views of the self. Basically what you were getting at, the Western view of the self tends to be a lot more individual, tends to be more focused on accomplishments, interpersonal freedom, like I can do what I want and nobody can restrict me. Often on future sorts of things, accomplishing, getting things, material wealth. While in many non-Western cultures, including a place like India or Bangladesh, it's a lot more, the self includes a lot of other people. And I think that has offered me different ways to think about my own life and my own self and who I am to be in the world. And I think that's been a great benefit to me. And I try to offer that to my students too. As we talk about these different ways of thinking about the self from different cultures, I say to them, where do you want to be, right? Now, instead of only having one option, you at least have multiple options. Which self do you choose? Which way do you want to see the world? And yeah, there's a lot of joy to be had in close, loving relationships. And, you know, when I lived in India, like you were saying, people are just really interconnected to each other. You feel part of each other's self. And that's an amazing feeling. I miss that sometimes when I'm living in the US. I miss that sense of interconnection and belonging that you feel just naturally living in cultures like that.
Yeah, I understand. And I have the last question for you. Your TED talk was titled How to Be Unhappy. And now, if I ask you how to be happy, you can give me three suggestions or only one. What would it be?
Stop trying to be happy. I think that's probably one of the best things you can do. Somebody gave this metaphor one time. I thought it was nice. That happiness is like a butterfly. The more you chase after it, the more it will evade you. When you're able to find sort of peace and contentment, the butterfly will come to you. And I think sometimes that desire and need and expectation to be happy is often misery inducing, and it's often focusing on the things that matter, that are meaningful. Joy just comes naturally, and as we were talking about before, happiness also goes naturally. So trying to be happy all the time, I don't think that's a very good goal. So maybe paradoxically, to say stop trying to be happy, I think can help you be happier.
Yep, I understood. So, Dr. Matthew, thank you for your time. It was really great talking to you. I really enjoyed our session. So, thank you
My
and
pleasure.
goodbye. Yep, goodbye.
Yes, thank you.